I woke up with the firm belief that this would be the most meaningful morning of my life, the day I would fulfill my promise to my late wife and walk my daughter into the chapel. The suit had been pressed. The church was ready. Everything was perfect. Then, before dawn had fully broken, our family driver appeared at my doorstep with a face full of worry. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the car, throwing a blanket over me. "Get in, right now!" "Have you gone mad?" I hissed. "Trust me." His voice trembled as he spoke, and I did. And what I saw from within that darkness could ruin a wedding but save a life. Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. Before the story continues, take a second to tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I genuinely enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with you directly. One important note: some elements in this narrative have been fictionalized for educational and storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to actual people or settings is coincidental. That said, the lesson I'm sharing carries meaningful value, and I hope it resonates with you. I woke at 6:30 to sunlight spilling across the bedroom walls, the same room Caroline and I had shared for 3 decades before cancer took her from me. It's been 5 years, but some mornings I still reach across the mattress expecting to find her there. That morning, I did it again. "Big day, love," I murmured into the quiet, as if she might somehow hear me. After the funeral, I stopped trying to define what I believed about heaven or signs. I only knew I still talked to her. I stood in front of the closet longer than necessary, staring at the navy suit hanging neatly on the rack. I'd bought it 3 months earlier. People fuss over the bride's dress, but no one talks about how a father debates every detail of what he'll wear when he gives his daughter away. Caroline would have chosen for me without hesitation. She always had an eye for these things. As I buttoned my shirt, my fingers trembled. Not from age, I'm 62 and steady enough, but from a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. A heaviness that had settled there the moment I opened my eyes. The house downstairs was silent. Too silent for a wedding morning. Daphne had stayed at her apartment with her bridesmaids, following the old tradition about the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. I'd offered the house there's more than enough space, but she wanted something smaller, something simple. Simple. I brewed coffee strong and black, the way years of early board meetings had trained me to prefer it. The machine sputtered and hummed in the kitchen I'd known for decades. Everything looked exactly as it should. So why did I feel like something was about to shift beneath my feet? I stood at the window overlooking the gardens. The May air was perfect, cool but bright, the kind of weather couples pray for when planning an outdoor reception. The white tent gleamed against the green lawn freshly set up the day before. Every chair, every flower, every detail was in place. Everything was prepared. Except me. I unlocked my phone and pulled up a photo from the engagement party 2 months earlier. Daphne stood beside Lance, her smile wide and unguarded, the happiest I'd seen her since we buried Caroline. My daughter had been broken for so long. Wasn't this what I wanted? Wasn't this what Caroline would have wanted for her? "Protect our girl," Caroline had whispered in the hospital room near the end. Her hand felt weightless in mine. "Promise me, Trevor, no matter what." I promise, I had said, and I meant it with everything I had. The crunch of tires on gravel snapped me out of the memory. I glanced at my watch, 6:55 a.m. Martin wasn't due until 7:30. We'd reviewed the timeline repeatedly. He would drive me to the church at 8. The ceremony began at 10, but there he was. The black sedan rolled up the driveway 15 minutes early. I set my coffee down and stepped outside. Martin Fuller had worked for our family for 20 years, long before Daphne was born. He drove Caroline to the hospital the night she gave birth. He drove me there again the night she didn't come home. If I trusted anyone beyond blood, it was him. He was already out of the car when I reached the steps. The sunlight caught the gray in his hair. I hadn't realized how much it had spread, and then I saw his face. Fear, not anxiety, not nerves. Real fear. The kind that hardens a man's jaw and sets his shoulders tight. Martin the First called. "What's wrong?" He approached quickly, glancing behind him, as though someone might be watching. When he reached me, he lowered his voice. "Mr. Donnelly, I need you to trust me." "I do trust you." "What is this about?" "Not here." His eyes flicked toward the house, the trees, the open driveway. "Please, get in the car." A chill ran through me. "You're starting to worry me." "Good," he replied quietly. "You should be worried. Just not about me." He had stood beside me when Caroline died. He had steadied me at her funeral. I had never seen him like this. "Is it Daphne?" I asked sharply. "Is she hurt?" "No," he said. "Not yet. Not yet." He opened the back door of the sedan. "She's about to make the worst decision of her life." Martin continued. "And you're the only one who can stop it. Please. We're running out of time." My thoughts spiraled: accident, threat, scandal, some hidden disaster tied to the wedding. But Martin's expression wasn't frantic. It was controlled, deliberate. He had prepared for this. I slid into the back seat. The leather was cool. The faint scent of lavender from the air freshener hung in the air. It felt absurdly normal. Martin reached for the dark blanket he kept in the car during winter months. "Lie down," he instructed. "Completely. You can't be seen." "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Donnelly." He held my gaze firmly. "I gave Miss Caroline my word 20 years ago that I would protect you and your daughter. I have never broken that promise. I'm not breaking it today." Hearing Caroline's name hit me harder than anything else. Somewhere across town, my daughter was preparing to marry Lance Lawson, a man who had entered her life quickly, a man who had helped her smile again, a man Martin clearly did not trust. Slowly, I lay across the seat. My jacket wrinkled beneath me. The blanket covered me fully, shutting out the morning light. "Whatever you hear," Martin said softly. "Whatever you see, don't react. Not until I tell you. Do you understand?" "I understand," I answered. But the truth was, I didn't understand anything at all. The door closed. The engine started. "Where are we going?" I asked from beneath the fabric. Martin's voice came steady and certain. "To show you who Lance Lawson really is." A pause. "And then we save your daughter." The world went dark under that blanket, but every sound became sharp, clear, dangerous. I'd been lying there maybe 10 minutes, long enough for my back to start aching against the leather seat, long enough to wonder if Martin had lost his mind when the car slowed and pulled to a stop. I heard the crunch of gravel under tires, then silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where were we? The front passenger door opened with a soft click. Someone slid into the seat, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne. Not Martin's usual subtle aftershave, but something bolder, younger. "Morning, Martin." The voice was smooth, confident. "Lance Lawson. My future son-in-law." "Good morning, Mr. Lawson." Martin's reply was perfectly neutral, professional. No hint of whatever fear I'd seen in his face 20 minutes ago. "A beautiful day for a wedding, isn't it?" Lance settled into his seat. I heard the rustle of fabric, his tuxedo probably. "I still can't believe this is really happening." "A big day indeed, sir." The car began to move again. I focused on keeping my breathing slow and quiet. Under the heavy blanket, the air was getting warm, stuffy. I wanted to shift position, but didn't dare. Lance's phone buzzed. "That'll be my bride," he said, and I heard the smile in his voice. "Hey, beautiful." Even through the blanket, through the sound of the engine, I could hear the change in his tone. Soft, warm, the voice of a man in love. "Oh no, I'm not nervous." "Well, maybe a little." He laughed. "You're going to take my breath away, aren't you?" "You always do." I felt my chest tighten. That was my daughter on the other end of that call. My Daphne probably standing in front of a mirror in her wedding dress, glowing with happiness. "I love you too," Lance said. "See you at the altar, sunshine." Sunshine. He called her Sunshine. The call ended. For a moment, There was only the hum of the engine and the muffled sound of traffic outside. I allowed myself to relax slightly. Maybe Martin was wrong. Maybe this was all some misunderstanding. The man I'd just heard sounded genuinely devoted to my daughter. Then Lance's phone rang again. Jesus, he muttered. His whole tone shifted, the warmth gone, replaced by something cold and clipped. He answered, "I told you not to call this number." I went rigid under the blanket. "No, I can't talk right now. I'm in the car. With the driver." A pause. I could hear a tinny voice on the other end, the words too faint to make out, but the urgency was clear. "I said we'd handle it. Everything is on track." The voice on the phone got louder, more insistent. "Look." Lance's voice dropped lower, harder. 3 months. Not before. We agreed on the timeline. Don't call me again until... He stopped abruptly, then finished in a harsh whisper. "Until it's done." He ended the call with more force than necessary. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. "Everything all right, Mr. Lawson?" Martin asked, his voice still perfectly even. "I'm fine. Just some business that won't wait." Lance's attempt at a casual laugh fell flat. "You know how it is. People think just because it's your wedding day, the whole world stops." "Indeed, sir. But I heard something in Lance's breathing. Quick, shallow, stressed. 3 months, not before, until it's done." What did that mean? What was supposed to happen in 3 months, and who was calling him? Calling him so urgently that they'd risk phoning on his wedding day. Under the blanket, my hands curled into fists. That second call hadn't sounded like love. It hadn't sounded like business either. It sounded like something else entirely. Something that made my future son-in-law's voice go cold and calculating. I tried to piece it together. The warmth with Daphne, then the ice with whoever that was. 2 different people in the same man. Or maybe, and this thought made my stomach drop, maybe the warmth was the act and the cold was what lay underneath. "We're taking a different route today, Mr. Lawson," Martin said calmly. "Construction on the main road." "Oh, sure, whatever you think is best." Lance didn't seem to care where we were going. He pulled out his phone again. I heard the soft tap-tap of typing. Texting someone. More business that couldn't wait. Or was he texting whoever had just called? I lay there in the darkness, breathing as quietly as I could, listening to every shift of fabric, every tap of his phone, every change in the engine's pitch as Martin navigated through traffic. This was what Martin wanted me to hear. This was why he'd shoved me into this car. But why? What did Martin know that I didn't? "How long have you worked for the Donnellys?" Lance asked suddenly. 20 years this September, sir." "That's a long time. You must be close to the family." "I consider it an honor to serve them." Something in Martin's phrasing made me think of that promise he'd mentioned. The promise he'd made to Caroline. What exactly had my wife asked him to do? "Trevor seems like a good man," Lance continued. "Little old-fashioned, maybe, but solid. The kind of father-in-law who'll want to stay involved, I imagine. Mr. Donnelly loves his daughter very much. I'm counting on that." Lance's voice had an odd quality I couldn't quite identify. "A man who loves his daughter will do anything to see her happy, won't he?" "I expect so, sir." "Good, that's good." The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the words themselves, they were perfectly innocent. But the tone underneath, like he was working through some private calculation. 3 months, everything is on track. My mind spun with possibilities, each darker than the last. Was he planning something? Was Daphne in danger? But that didn't make sense. Why would he marry her if he meant her harm, unless the marriage itself was part of whatever plan he had? The car made a turn, and I felt myself slide slightly against the seat. Martin must have noticed, because he spoke up quickly. "Hit a rough patch there. Road work everywhere these days. No kidding, Lance replied, distracted. His phone buzzed again. Sorry, I need to take this, but this time when he answered, his voice was careful. Hey. Yeah, I'm on my way. No, we're good. I'll call you later, okay? Yeah. Later. He ended the call fast. Too fast. Like he didn't want anyone Martin to hear too much. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but I knew I was hearing something important. Something that explained the fear in Martin's eyes this morning. In the darkness under that blanket, with nothing to go on but sounds and fragments of conversation, I felt dread pooling in my gut like cold water. 3 months. Not before. Until it's done. What was going to happen in 3 months? And what did it have to do with my daughter's wedding day? I didn't have answers yet. But I knew with a certainty that made my chest ache that Martin was right to be afraid. 3 months on track for what my stomach twisted with a dread I couldn't name yet. 20 minutes into what should have been a straight shot to St. Benedict's Cathedral, Martin turned south. I felt it, before I understood it. The pull of gravity as the sedan banked left the shift in momentum, telling me we were heading away from downtown. Beneath the blanket, I had only sensation to guide me: the engine's hum, the rhythm of stops and starts, sunlight warming the fabric against my face. This turn felt wrong. My internal compass screamed at me. St. Benedict's was north and east, a straight 15-minute drive through oak-lined streets. This route had too many turns, too much stop-and-go traffic. We were heading south, away from the cathedral, away from the wedding. In the front seat, Lance's phone buzzed, harsh, insistent vibrations, demanding attention. Damn it, he muttered. I heard fabric rustle as he checked the screen. Another buzz. Then another. Everything all right, Mr. Lawson? Martin asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yeah, fine. Lance paused, weighing something. Actually, Martin, I need to make a quick stop. Won't take more than 5 minutes. Of course, sir. Where to? Maple Street, South Side. You know it. No hesitation, none at all. Yes, sir, I know it. That was when I knew. Martin hadn't been surprised. He'd been expecting this. That's why he'd hidden me in the back seat. That's why we were driving south instead of north. Martin had planned this. The sedan accelerated, merging onto what felt like a highway, smooth, concrete, rushing traffic distance covered quickly. Route 9, probably. The industrial corridor cutting through the city's midsection before dipping into the working neighborhoods. Through the gap in the blanket, I caught glimpses of harsh sunlight hitting concrete without the filter of trees. The air felt different, thicker, grittier. Exhaust and hot pavement. We slowed. Traffic lights. Frequent stops. City driving in a neighborhood where people lived close together. Next light, take a left. Lance said, his voice stripped of charm. 2 blocks down. Understood. The road changed, rougher pavement potholes jarring the suspension. Streets that got repaired last, if at all. Through the fabric, I sensed buildings changing around us. Taller structures giving way to shorter ones, glass replaced by brick and siding. Dogs barking, children's voices, a metal gate clanging shut. This was a neighborhood where people hung laundry on lines, where corner stores sold lottery tickets, where families packed into townhouses and made the best of what they had. The middle ground where most people lived. A world Lance Lawson had never mentioned. Here, he said. The one with the blue trim. Tires crunched over gravel. The engine idled to a low rumble. Lance's door opened. Just give me a few minutes. Of course, sir. His footsteps faded quick strides across uneven pavement. A gate creaked. Then silence. Mr. Donnelly, Martin's whisper was urgent. Look now, but stay down. I shifted the blanket just enough to see through the gap between the seats. We were parked before a narrow townhouse. 2 stories. Blue-gray siding faded to weathered denim. A small porch with rusted railing. The yard was overgrown grass, bordered by a leaning chain-link fence. At the end of a cracked walkway stood a mailbox. Nothing special, just standard metal bolted to a wooden post that tilted left. Peeling paint. Worn edges. But the letters stenciled across its side were clear. The Lawson family. I stared, my brain stuttering over the words. Lawson. Lance's name. The man marrying my daughter in less than 3 hours. The man who'd told us his parents were dead, no siblings, nobody to invite except college friends. The man who'd said he was alone in the world, that Daphne and I would be his whole family. So why was there a mailbox with his name on a working-class townhouse? Present tense. The Lawson family. As if people named Lawson still lived here, still received mail here, still called this home. Lance walked up the cracked steps. He didn't knock. His hand went straight to the doorknob, twisted it, pushed the door open like he'd done it 1,000 times. Like he belonged there. The door swung inward, revealing only shadow, and Lance stepped inside. It closed behind him with a soft click. I stared at that closed door, heart pounding. Lawson. The Lawson family. This wasn't the story he'd told us over dinner at our estate or during the engagement party, or in any conversation over the past 2 years. This was something hidden, something he'd kept locked away from Daphne and me. My hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. Lawson, that was his name. But why did he have a mailbox here? Why did he walk into this house like he owned it? And why on the morning of his wedding to my daughter did he need to stop here at all? Martin opened my door and leaned in close, his voice barely a breath in the cool morning air. Mr. Donnelly, you need to see this with your own eyes. Stay low. Watch the side entrance. I didn't argue. Whatever Martin had brought me here to witness, whatever truth hid behind that faded blue door with Lance Lawson's name on the mailbox, I needed to see it. For Daphne. For myself. For the promise I'd made to Caroline 5 years ago when she squeezed my hand on her deathbed and whispered, "Take care of our girl." I unfolded myself from the cramped back seat joints, protesting each movement. 62 years old, crouching behind a sedan like a private investigator in a bad crime novel. But this wasn't fiction. This was my daughter's future unraveling in real time. Martin positioned himself between me and the house, blocking the view from the front windows. I stayed low, using the car as cover eyes fixed on the narrow alley beside the townhouse. The side entrance, Martin mentioned, a weathered door with peeling white paint half hidden by an overgrown hedge. The morning sun beat down on cracked pavement, heat shimmering in the air. Somewhere down the block, a screen door slammed. A dog barked twice, then fell silent. Normal sounds. A normal Saturday morning in a normal neighborhood. Except nothing about this was normal. I heard the front door open and close, the solid thunk of wood meeting frame. Lance's footsteps echoed on the porch, then faded as he moved deeper inside. My heart hammered each beat, a question without an answer. What is he doing here? Who lives here? Why today? Minutes dragged by. 2, 3, 4. Each second stretched unbearably long. Then the side door opened. A woman stepped out first. Early 30s. Dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Jeans and a faded gray t-shirt worn thin by too many washes. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from sleepless nights and unpaid bills. Her face was drawn, eyes shadowed, but her jaw was set with stubborn resolve. A woman used to carrying weight she shouldn't carry alone. She crossed her arms defensively and turned back toward the open doorway. "Lance, please, you can't keep doing this." Her voice was soft but strained, pulled tight like wire. I couldn't hear his reply from inside, but I didn't need to. Her expression said enough: frustration, resignation, fear. Then I heard it, a child's voice, high-pitched, excited, from inside the house. "Daddy, Daddy!" The word struck me like a blow to the chest. "Daddy!" A little girl burst through the side door, small feet pounding on the steps. She couldn't have been more than 4, blonde curls, bouncing pink sneakers, flashing a stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. She wore a yellow sundress with daisies, the kind a father chooses, because it makes his child smile. "Daddy!" she cried again, running toward the doorway, and Lance Lawson stepped out to catch her. He scooped her up effortlessly, lifting her high as she squealed with joy. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her close. Not like a stranger, not like a visitor, but like a man who had done this 1,000 times. Like a father. "Hey, sweetheart," he murmured, voice gentle in a way I'd never heard. He kissed the top of her head, fingers soft in her curls. "I can't stay long today." But why? She pulled back, bottom lip trembling. "You said you'd play tea party with me and Mr. Floppy." She held up the stuffed rabbit. His smile faltered for half a second, then returned, practiced, familiar, the same charm he'd used on Daphne. On me. On everyone who trusted him. "I know, baby. I'm sorry. Daddy has to work today, but I'll be back soon. I promise." Liar. The words screamed inside my head. He wasn't going to work. He was going to St. Benedict's Cathedral. He was going to stand at the altar in a tailored tuxedo and vow himself to my daughter. Promise her forever, while this child waited at home for a father building a second life. The woman, his wife, she had to be, stepped closer, arms still crossed. "Zach, we need to talk about." "Not now, Marley." His voice sharpened, warmth draining instantly. He set the child down, gently ruffling her hair. "Mia, go inside and finish breakfast. Mommy and I need a minute." Mia. Her name was Mia. She hesitated, sensing tension, then ran back inside, Rabbit trailing behind her. Marley watched her disappear, then faced Lance again, voice low and urgent. "You can't keep lying to her. She asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why you're gone. I'm handling it." "Handling it!" Her voice cracked. "You're getting married today. To someone else. How is that handling anything?" My breath caught. She knew. About Daphne. About the wedding. Everything. Lance glanced around, scanning the street, fear flickering. His eyes passed Martin's sedan past me without stopping. I stayed frozen, heart pounding. "I told you the plan," he said coldly. 1 year. With the Donnelly money, I pay off Greco. Then we're free. Mia gets the medical care she needs. We start over. "And what about her?" Marley whispered. "What about Daphne? You'll ruin her life." "She'll get over it. Rich people always do." I wanted to move, to stand, to confront him, demand answers, drag him away and make him explain how he could lie to my daughter's face. But I couldn't move. I could only listen as my nightmare confirmed itself. Lance pulled Marley close, voice soft, almost tender. "I'm doing this for us. For Mia. Trust me." She pulled away, eyes shining. "I stopped trusting you a long time ago." He flinched, then walked toward the front without another word. Marley stood there, shoulders sagging, then went inside, closing the door quietly. I stayed crouched behind the car, mind spinning. Lance Lawson had a wife. He had a daughter. And in less than 3 hours, he was going to marry Daphne. I should have confronted him right then and there. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stand up, to walk across that cracked pavement, to grab Lance Lawson by his collar and demand the truth in front of his wife and his daughter and God himself. But Martin's hand landed on my shoulder, firm, steady, anchoring me in place. "Wait." He whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "There's more. More. What more could there possibly be?" The man was married. He had a child. He was about to commit bigamy in front of 200 wedding guests and a priest who believed every word of the vows Lance would speak. But Martin's grip didn't loosen, and something in his tone told me he was right. Whatever I'd seen so far was only part of the picture, so I stayed low, crouched behind the sedan, like a man half my age, my knees aching and my hands balled into fists. Across the narrow yard, Mia's bright voice called out from inside the house. "Mommy, can I have more juice?" Marley glanced back through the open side door, her expression softening for just a moment. "In a minute, sweetheart." Go play with your toys for now, okay? Okay. The sound of small feet pattering away. A door closing somewhere deep in the house. Then Marley turned back to Lance and the softness vanished. Her arms crossed over her chest again, that defensive posture I'd seen before, like she was trying to hold herself together by sheer force of will. You're really going through with this. Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, something raw and desperate. Lance didn't look at her. He was staring out at the street, his jaw tight, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. Cold. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not when Greco's involved. He turned to face her then, and even from where I crouched, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the hard set of his mouth. He gave us until the end of the year, Marley. That's it. If I don't pay him back by then. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marley's face went pale. I know. But this Zach, she's a person. Daphne is a real person with real feelings. Her father seems like a decent man. This feels wrong. It feels evil. So their decency doesn't save Mia. Lance's voice turned sharp, cutting through her protest like a blade. Their money does. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My money, my family's money. That's what this was about. That's what Daphne was to him, a bank account with a pretty face and a trusting heart. Marley shook her head, her eyes glistening. And after, when she finds out, she won't. Zach, she won't. His tone left no room for argument. Once I'm her legal husband, I'll have access to everything. Joint accounts, family trusts. The Donnelly portfolio is worth over $200 million, Marley. All I need is 1 year. 1 year to get what we need, pay off Greco, and disappear. She'll never even know what happened. 1 year. The timeline clicked into place in my mind, like puzzle pieces I'd been too blind to see before. The rushed engagement Lance had proposed after only 6 months of dating. The quick wedding he'd insisted they get married this spring instead of waiting for fall, like Daphne had wanted. The way he'd charmed his way into every family dinner, every business meeting, every corner of our lives, with that easy smile and those smooth words. He'd been planning this from the start. What if she files for divorce? Marley's voice was barely a whisper now. What if she goes to the police? Lance let out a harsh laugh. Rich people don't go to the police. They go to their lawyers, and by the time her lawyers figure out what happened, we'll be long gone. New names, new city, new life, and Mia. Mia gets the medical care she needs, the surgeries, the specialists, everything she couldn't get while we're drowning in Greco's debt. His voice softened just slightly. That's what matters. Not some spoiled hotel heiress who'll cry into her champagne for a few months, and then move on to the next guy her daddy approves of. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell him that Daphne wasn't spoiled, that she'd worked her entire life to earn her place in the company, that she'd mourned her mother with a grief that had nearly broken her, that she deserved so much better than this lying, calculating predator who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. But Martin's hand was still on my shoulder, and his grip tightened as if he could sense my rage building. Wait, he breathed. Just wait. Marley wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders hunching forward. I can't keep doing this, Zach. I can't keep lying to Mia. She asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why you're gone so much. It'll be over soon. Will it? Her voice cracked. Or will you just find another scheme, another woman to use? When does it end? Lance's expression hardened. It ends when we're free of Greco. That's when it ends. He pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and cursed under his breath. I have to go. The wedding starts in less than 3 hours. Zeko, I'll call you tonight. He turned toward the front of the house without looking back. Keep Mia inside. I don't want her seeing me leave. She already knows you're here. You then distract her. His footsteps echoed on the wooden porch steps, then faded as he rounded the corner toward the street. Marley stood there for a long moment, her face buried in her hands. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes and went back inside, closing the side door behind her with a soft click. I stayed frozen behind the sedan, my entire body shaking with a rage I could barely contain. Less than 1 year. That's how long Lance Lawson had planned to stay married to my daughter. Less than 1 year to drain our family's accounts, pay off his debts, and vanish with his real wife and child, leaving Daphne with nothing but betrayal and a broken heart. My hands were still clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to draw blood. I wanted to chase him down, to drag him back here and make him confess everything, to call the police, the FBI, anyone who could stop this nightmare before it was too late. But Martin's voice cut through the haze of my anger. Mr. Donnelly, quiet, steady. There's more you need to know. Get back in the car. I turned to look at him, my vision blurring with fury. More. What else could there possibly be? Martin's face was grim. The worst part, after Lance finished speaking with Marley and headed back toward the street, Martin moved fast. Mr. Lawson? He called, stepping around the sedan with practiced ease. I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with the car. The engine's making a strange noise. I don't want to risk breaking down on the way to the cathedral. Lance stopped short, irritation flashing across his face. Today? Are you serious? I apologize, sir. It just started. Martin gestured toward the hood. With the wedding in less than 2 hours, I don't want to take any chances. Why don't you call a rideshare? I'll get this checked out and meet you at St. Benedict's. Lance pulled out his phone, jaw tight. Fine. But if this makes me late, it won't, sir, I promise. Within minutes, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Lance climbed inside without another word. The vehicle drove off and disappeared around the corner. The moment he was gone, Martin turned back to the sedan, where I was still crouched behind the rear door, my heart slamming against my ribs. That was quick thinking, I said, my voice hoarse. Martin's expression remained grim. Get in, Mr. Donnelly. There's something else you need to see. I slid into the back seat, my legs stiff after being cramped so long. When the door shut, sealing us inside the quiet shell of the car, Martin reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. There's more, he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were dark. Something much worse. He unlocked the screen and turned it toward me. The first image was a screenshot of an email. The sender address was nothing but random letters and numbers. Anonymous. Untraceable. The message itself was unmistakable. Target 3 months post-wedding. Priority, make it look like an accident. No traces. $50,000 on completion. My blood turned cold. I read it again. And again. Trying to force the words to mean something else. Target 3 months, accident, $50,000. Scroll, Martin said quietly. My hands shook as I swiped. The next image showed messages from an encrypted app. The kind used when people didn't want to be found. Subject leaves estate daily at 7:30 a.m. Takes Route 9 to downtown office. Black sedan. Usually alone except for driver. My schedule, my routine, my life reduced to notes. Tuesdays and Thursdays lunch meeting at Riverside Grill. Walks from parking garage. 2-block stretch. Minimal foot traffic. Every habit, every weakness. Friday evenings private club on Hamilton Street. Valet parking. Returns to vehicle alone around 10 p.m. The club I'd felt safe in for decades. Keep going, Martin said. I swiped again. A bank transfer record appeared. $10,000 sent from an unfamiliar shell company. The memo line read, Deposit services pending completion. Deposit, not payment, meaning the rest would come later. After I was dead, my vision blurred. The phone trembled in my hands. He's planning to, I couldn't finish. Yes, Martin said. Lance Lawson hired someone to kill you. 3 months after the wedding. Once he's legally married to Daphne and has access to the family accounts, everything snapped into place. The rushed engagement, the sudden wedding, the 1-year timeline Marley mentioned. It was never about staying married. It was about surviving long enough to become a widower. No divorce, no court battles, just a tragic accident and a grieving son-in-law positioned to inherit everything when the patriarch died. "The call this morning," I whispered. In the car. When he said 3 months, that was confirmation, Martin said. He was finalizing the timeline with the person he hired. The memory replayed clearly. Lance's tense voice, his nervous glance. Everything is on track. 3 months. Not 1 day sooner. Not a business deal. A murder. "How did you find this?" I asked. "I've been watching him for 2 weeks, Martin said. "Ever since he started asking questions about your schedule, about your routines, things that didn't make sense. You were spying on him. I installed monitoring software on his laptop when he left it unattended at the estate last week." He didn't flinch. I needed confirmation. "I found this yesterday." "Does he know?" "No, it runs quietly." "And Marley," I asked. "Does she know about this?" Martin shook his head. "She knows about the fraud, the money, but not this." My hands trembled as I opened my own phone and began photographing each screen. The email, the messages, the bank transfer. One by one. Evidence. Proof that Lance wasn't just a liar or a thief. He was planning murder. Click. Another photo. Click. Another. I documented every word, every detail. Mr. Donnelly, Martin said gently. "Are you all right?" I wasn't. How could I be? My daughter's fiancé had ordered my death. Every smile, every dinner, every handshake had been part of a countdown. But I nodded. "I have everything." "Good. We'll need it." I stared at the screenshots once more. At the cold language that turned my life into a target and my death into completion. At the $50,000 assigned to my existence. 3 months. That's how long he planned to wait. 3 months after marrying Daphne. 3 months after gaining access. 3 months after securing his position. My daughter would lose her father. She would grieve. And the man who ordered my death would hold her while she cried. The thought made me nauseous. I looked at Martin. He was going to make her a widow. She'd spend her life believing it was an accident. "I know," Martin said. We sat in silence. The sun beat against the roof. A door slammed somewhere nearby. A dog barked. Normal sounds. Inside the car, I held proof of a murder-for-hire plot. This wasn't about money anymore. This was far more dangerous. I needed answers, and the woman inside that house was the only person who could give them to me. "I need to talk to her." I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "To Marley." Martin's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Donnelly, are you sure Lance could come back?" "He won't. Not for a while. He thinks you're fixing the car." I reached for the door handle. "I need to understand why, and I need her at that church." Martin hesitated, then nodded. "I'll keep watch." I stepped out of the sedan and walked across the cracked pavement toward the blue-gray townhouse. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with the knowledge of what I'd just learned. My heart hammered as I climbed the wooden steps to the small porch. I raised my hand and knocked. Footsteps inside. Quick. Light. The door opened, and Marley Lawson stood there, her expression shifting from hope to confusion to something close to panic in the span of a heartbeat. "Lance, did you forget?" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. Her face went pale. "Mr. Donnelly, how did you—" "I know everything." My voice came out harder than I intended. "Now you're going to tell me the truth." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her shoulders sagged, and something inside her seemed to break. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." The house was small but tidy. Worn furniture that had seen better days, children's toys scattered across a threadbare rug, the kind of home where people made do with what they had and tried to pretend it was enough. From somewhere deeper in the house, I heard a child's laughter. Mia, playing with her toys, oblivious to the nightmare her father had created. Marley closed the door behind me and leaned against it. Her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold herself together. "How much do you know?" "Enough. The secret marriage, the plan to steal from my family, the 1-year timeline." I paused, watching her face. "And the part about eliminating me 3 months after the wedding." Her eyes went wide. "What? You didn't know about that part, did you?" She shook her head, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God. No, I didn't." Her voice cracked. "He wouldn't. Would he?" "He already has. There's a contract. A deposit's been paid." Marley sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I knew he was desperate, but I didn't think he'd... She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Tell me why," I said. "Tell me all of it." She took a shaky breath and began. "We owe Anthony Greco nearly $500,000. Lance made bad investments, got in over his head with some startup that crashed. When the money dried up, he went to Greco for a loan. Then Mia was born premature, 2 months early. The NICU bills alone were over $95,000. Specialists, surgeries, equipment." Her voice trembled as she spoke, each word heavy with exhaustion and fear. "Greco gave us a deadline, end of the year. He said if we didn't pay by then, he'd..." She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The threat was clear enough. "He'd take Mia," I said quietly. Marley nodded, wiping her eyes. Lance panicked. He started looking for ways to get money fast. That's when he found your daughter. At some networking event. He saw an opportunity, a wealthy family, a trusting woman. And he... Her voice broke. He saw a way out. I felt sick. Daphne had been nothing more than a target, a means to an end. But you tried to stop it," I said, remembering the pieces Martin and I had overheard. "Didn't you?" Marley's head snapped up, her eyes red and swollen. "Yes. God, yes, I tried. I swear I tried, Mr. Donnelly." She stood and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a folder. She opened it on the coffee table, spreading out its contents with trembling hands. 3 weeks ago, I sent an anonymous letter to Daphne's office, warning her about Lance, that he wasn't who he said he was. She showed me a handwritten draft, the words shaky but clear. "The man you're about to marry is hiding something. Please investigate before it's too late." 2 weeks ago, I called her. I got through to her assistant, said it was urgent, but before I could say more than a few words, Lance came home early. He heard me on the phone. He'd down. She touched her wrist, and I saw the faint shadow of an old bruise. He took the phone, deleted the call log, told me if I ever tried again, I'd never see Mia, that he'd take her and disappear, and I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if she was alive. My hands curled into fists. Last week, I tried to send an email from the library, but Lance has spyware on my computer, on my phone. He knew within hours. He deleted the draft before I could send it. She pulled out a phone, showing me her deleted items folder, an unsent email to Daphne's personal address, a warning that never made it. "I kept copies," Marley whispered. "Everything, the letter, the phone records showing I called her office, the email draft. I knew if something went wrong, I'd need proof that I tried." She reached into the folder and pulled out more documents. A marriage certificate with her and Lance's names, dated 5 years ago. Photos of them together, younger, happier before Greco, and debt and desperation had twisted everything into this nightmare. "Yet I have everything here," she said. "Proof of our marriage. Proof that Mia is his daughter. Proof that I tried to warn your daughter, and he stopped me." Her voice broke. "I wanted to save her. I wanted to protect her from him, but I couldn't. I was too afraid of losing Mia. I looked at the folder at the evidence of a woman trapped between her child and her conscience. She'd tried. In her own terrified way, she'd tried to stop Lance, and Daphne had never known. "Did Daphne ever see the letter?" I asked. Marley shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe her assistant threw it away. Maybe she thought it was a prank. I never heard back. The anonymous warnings. The strange call that never went through. Daphne had probably dismissed them as wedding jitters or jealous rivals. She'd never known how close someone had come to saving her. I met Marley's eyes. "You're going to come to the church. With Mia, with that folder. This ends today." She looked terrified. "He'll kill me. He's already planning to kill me. And he's about to destroy my daughter's life." I kept my voice firm. "You have a choice, Marley. Help me stop him, or let him turn Daphne into a widow and leave you and Mia with nothing but guilt." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, we'll come." I looked at the folder again. At the proof of Marley's desperate attempts to save a woman she'd never met. At the evidence that my daughter had been warned and had never known it. She'd tried to save Daphne, and my daughter had ignored every warning. By the time we left Maple Street, it was nearly 8:45. The wedding at St. Benedict's would begin in just over an hour. Martin drove in silence the sedan, cutting through the late morning traffic with practiced efficiency. I sat in the back, my phone clutched in one hand, Marley's folder of evidence beside me on the seat. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. "I should go home," I said suddenly. "I should tell her right now, before any of this goes further." Martin's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, steady and knowing. "With all due respect, sir, she won't believe you. Not without proof she can see with her own eyes." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. 2 months ago, I'd tried. Not directly, I hadn't known enough then to be direct. But I'd asked careful questions over dinner. Innocent inquiries about Lance's past, his family, his career before he'd met Daphne. And my daughter had shut me down. "Dad, if you don't like him, just say it." She'd set her voice tight with frustration. "But don't make up reasons to push him away. I love him, and I thought you'd be happy for me." I'd backed off, apologized, told her I just wanted to make sure she was making the right choice, that I trusted her judgment. But the truth was, I'd been afraid. Afraid of the distance that had already started to grow between us since Caroline died. Afraid that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose Daphne completely. So I'd stayed silent. And Lance had used that silence to burrow deeper into our lives. I should have done a background check. I said the words, bitter on my tongue. "Why didn't I do that?" "Because Miss Daphne asked you to trust her choice," Martin said quietly. "And you respected that." "I respected it right into a trap. You were being a good father, sir. Lance Lawson is a professional liar. He's fooled everyone." I looked out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood. The tree-lined avenues, the manicured lawns, the world where people like Lance Lawson weren't supposed to exist. You suspected something," I said. "Didn't you?" Martin hesitated, then nodded. 2 weeks ago, I started noticing inconsistencies, small things. The way he asked questions about your routine, his interest in the family's financial structure. So I took it upon myself to investigate. Without telling me, "I needed to be certain before I brought it to you, sir. I've been with your family for 20 years. I wasn't about to accuse your daughter's fiancé without solid proof." 20 years. Martin had been there when Daphne was 10, when Caroline was diagnosed, when we'd buried her 5 years ago, and Daphne had clung to my arm at the funeral, both of us trying not to fall apart. He'd earned the right to protect us, even from threats I'd been too blind to see. She won't believe me if I tell her alone, I said more to myself than to Martin. She'll think I'm jealous, or controlling, or trying to ruin her happiness. Yes, sir, but if she sees it herself, Marley, Maya, the marriage certificate, all of it in front of everyone at the church, she'll have no choice but to accept the truth. The plan crystallized in my mind. Brutal, public, devastating, but necessary. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First, my lawyer. Douglas Whitmore had been handling the Donnelly family's legal affairs for 30 years. He picked up on the second ring. Doug, I need you at St. Benedict's Cathedral, before the wedding, with a legal team. I'll explain when you get there, but this is urgent. His voice was sharp with concern, but he didn't ask questions. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Next, the police. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Bigamy fraud, a potential threat to my life. The detective on the line promised to send officers to the church discreetly. We'll coordinate with you, Mr. Donnelly, but we'll need solid evidence. You'll have it. Finally, I called Marley. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaky. Mr. Donnelly, you and Mia need to come to the church. Use the back entrance on Hamilton Street. 9:45. I'll have someone waiting to bring you inside. I'm scared, I know, but this is the only way to protect your daughter. And mine. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, we'll be there. I ended the call and leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes. A memory surfaced unbidden and sharp. Caroline, 5 years ago, lying in a hospital bed, her face pale, her hand so small and fragile in mine. The cancer had taken so much from her, already her strength, her energy, her certainty about the future, but not her fierceness. Not when it came to Daphne. Trevor, she'd whispered, her voice hoarse. Promise me something. Anything. Protect our girl. Even when she doesn't understand. Especially when she doesn't understand. I'd squeezed her hand, fighting back tears. I promise. Sometimes love means breaking their heart to save their life. I hadn't understood then. Not really. But I understood now. I was about to walk into St. Benedict's Cathedral and destroy the happiest day of my daughter's life. I was about to humiliate her in front of 200 guests, reveal that the man she loved was a fraud, and shatter every dream she'd built over the past 2 years. And she would hate me for it, at least for a while, but she would be alive, safe, free from Lance Lawson and his plans to use her and discard her and eventually leave her a widow. Martin pulled the sedan into our estate's driveway. The house stood quiet and elegant in the morning sun, its windows gleaming, the gardens in full bloom. Everything looked perfect, peaceful, a lie just like Lance. We have 45 minutes, Martin said, checking his watch. I nodded, gripping the folder Marley had given me. Then let's make sure we're ready. I looked at the house one more time, the home where Daphne had grown up, where Caroline had taught her to ride a bike and bake cookies and believe in happy endings. I was about to ruin the happiest day of my daughter's life, and it was the only way to save her. When I stepped through the front door of our home, I had to pretend this was the happiest day of my life. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the entrance hall. White roses and lilies filled every vase, their perfume heavy in the air. Everything looked flawless. Wedding day perfect. From upstairs came laughter, women's voices, bright and excited. The bridesmaids helping Daphne get ready. Then I heard her. Dad, is that you? I looked up. Daphne appeared at the top of the staircase, her face lighting up when she saw me. She wore a white silk robe, her hair half-styled curlers pinned in place. Even unfinished, she looked radiant. Where have you been? She asked, as she hurried down bare feet, soft against the carpet. I was worried you left so early, and Martin mentioned something about the car. I forced a smile. The smile a father wears on his daughter's wedding day. Just needed some fresh air, sweetheart. Big day. She reached the bottom and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tighter than necessary, memorizing the feel of her knowing what I was about to do. "I'm so nervous," she whispered. "But I'm happy, Dad. I really am. Lance he's everything I hoped for." The words cut deep. I closed my eyes and kissed the top of her head, breathing in her shampoo. Lavender and vanilla, the same scent Caroline used to buy when Daphne was little. "I know, honey." She pulled back, eyes shining. "I just wish Mom could be here today. She would have loved this." My throat tightened. I brushed a strand of hair from her face the way I had since she was a child. "She's here," I said softly, "always with us." Daphne's smile trembled. "You really think so?" "I know so. And she'd want me to protect you." Daphne, a bridesmaid, called from upstairs. "We need you hair and makeup." Daphne laughed and wiped her eyes. "Coming." She turned back to me, glowing. "I have to finish getting ready. You'll walk me down the aisle right like we practiced. I wouldn't miss it." She hugged me again, quick and fierce. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too," I said. "More than you know." She kissed my cheek and ran upstairs, the white silk robe fluttering behind her. I stood there watching her disappear around the corner. In less than 2 hours, I was going to break her heart. I would stand before 200 people and expose the man she loved as a liar, a bigamist, a criminal planning to steal from our family, and worse. I would destroy this beautiful moment publicly and completely. She would hate me, maybe not forever. Maybe one day she'd understand I'd done it to save her, to protect her from a man who saw her as nothing but a bank account. But right now, she loved him. She believed in him. She'd built her future around becoming his wife. I moved through the house like a ghost. Past the dining room where Lance had shared meals with us. Past Caroline's study, her books still lining the shelves, her glasses resting where she left them. Past the living room, where 3 months ago Lance had knelt and proposed while I watched my daughter's face light up with joy. I had said yes, shaken his hand, welcomed him into our family, because I trusted Daphne, because I wanted her happy, because I was afraid of asking questions that might push her away. Now I was paying for that trust. I stopped before the portrait in the hallway. Caroline and me on our wedding day. She wore white lace holding peonies. I wore a tuxedo slightly too big and a nervous smile. We were young. Certain love was enough. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have seen it sooner." Her painted smile didn't change. Her eyes, Daphne's eyes, looked back at me. Sometimes love means breaking their heart to save their life. I checked my watch. 9:20. 40 minutes until the church. 40 minutes until everything changed. Upstairs, laughter continued. Music played. Bridesmaids talked about flowers and photos and how beautiful Daphne looked. She had no idea. For these last minutes, I would let her believe. Let her have this final moment of joy. Once I stood up in that church, her world would shatter. She would see me not as her protector, but as the man who ruined her happiest day. But she would be alive. She would be safe. And someday, God willing, she would forgive me. I turned from Caroline's portrait and walked toward my study to change into my tuxedo. In less than 2 hours, I would break my daughter's heart. But right now, I would let her have this moment. The ride to St. Benedict's felt like a funeral procession, even though everyone else was smiling. I sat beside Daphne in the back of the white limousine, watching the city drift past through the tinted windows. She held her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath in her lap, fingers trembling slightly against the silk ribbon. She looked breathtaking. The wedding dress Carolyn and I had helped her choose fit her perfectly, lace sleeves, a sweetheart neckline, a long train meant to glide down the cathedral aisle like something from a fairy tale. Her hair was pinned in soft curls, a simple veil secured with Caroline's vintage hairpin, the one her grandmother wore, the one Caroline wore on our wedding day. She looked so much like her mother it made my chest ache. "Dad," Daphne said softly, pulling me from my thoughts. She reached over and took my hand, squeezing it. "My hands are shaking. Is that normal? I looked at our joined hands, hers small and delicate, mine rough from decades of work. I could feel her pulse racing beneath her skin. Completely normal, sweetheart. Silence settled between us, filled only by the hum of the engine and distant traffic. The driver guided us through familiar streets, carrying us closer to St. Benedict's Cathedral, closer to the moment everything would collapse. Dad, Daphne said again, quieter now. Do you like Lance? I mean, really like him. The question struck hard. I turned to her and saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the same look she'd worn as a child, asking if she was good enough, smart enough, lovable enough. She needed reassurance, and I couldn't give it. What matters, I said carefully, is that you're happy. Her brow furrowed. That's not what I asked. No, it wasn't. I lifted my hand and touched her face the way I had when she was small. I've always wanted what's best for you, Daphne. That will never change. She studied me for a long moment, searching for something I refused to give. Then she relaxed and leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she used to during movie nights. I love you, Dad. I love you too, more than anything. We stayed that way as the city passed by. I watched streets I'd known my whole life slide past the window. Riverside Park, where I taught her to ride a bike. The cafe Caroline and I visited every Sunday. The corner where I pulled over 5 years ago after the hospital called to say Caroline was gone. The same streets, but nothing was the same. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I shifted carefully and checked it. Martin, Marley, and Mia are en route. Back entrance secured. Officers in position. Everything is ready, sir. I typed back, understood. Work, Daphne asked. Martin confirming timing. She nodded, trusting, and rested her head against me again. Ahead, the spire of St. Benedict's rose into view, its stone facade catching the late morning sun. The same cathedral where Caroline and I were married 35 years ago. I remembered standing at the altar, hands shaking, breath stolen, when I saw her walking toward me in white lace. We'd promised forever, and we meant it. We built a life, raised a daughter, loved each other through everything, until cancer ended it. Now Daphne was about to stand at that altar with a man who planned to betray her. Not if I could stop it. The limousine slowed near the cathedral. Guests gathered on the steps. Photographers adjusted lenses. Curious strangers paused to watch. 200 guests, 200 witnesses, 200 people about to watch a dream shatter. We're here, Daphne whispered, sitting up. She smoothed her dress, checked her veil in the mirror tucked into her bouquet. Oh God, this is really happening. Yes, I said. She turned to me, eyes shining with tears she believed were joy. Thank you for everything, for raising me, for supporting me, for always protecting me. The words cut deep. I cupped her face, looking into Caroline's eyes, memorizing this moment. I love you, Daphne, no matter what happens today. No matter what you think of me after this. I love you more than my own life. She smiled, confused by my intensity, but too happy to question it. I know, Dad. I love you too. The driver opened the door. Sound rushed in, laughter, music, camera shutters. We'd stopped at the side entrance, away from the crowd. Daphne gathered her dress, preparing to step out. I watched her for one final second. She believed she was walking toward her happily ever after. I was about to protect her in the worst way possible, in a way that would make her hate me. But she would be alive. She would be safe. And someday she would understand. I stepped out and offered her my hand. It was time. We arrived at St. Benedict's 15 minutes early. The old stone cathedral stood as it had for more than a century, solid, unmoving, carrying the weight of countless ceremonies within its walls. Today it would carry mine. The Gothic structure rose against the late morning sky, its spire reaching upward like a prayer carved in stone. Stained glass windows depicted angels, saints, and moments of divine mercy, their colors softened by the light filtering in from outside. Thick stone walls kept the air cool even on warm days like this. Inside, the cathedral had been transformed. White roses and lilies lined the aisle, their fragrance blending with candle wax and old wood. Hundreds of candles flickered in polished brass holders, casting gentle shadows along the vaulted ceiling above. Everything looked perfect. Beautiful. Exactly as Daphne had imagined. Guests were beginning to arrive, business associates in tailored suits, longtime family friends in their finest clothes, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They smiled and nodded as they took their seats, whispering softly, admiring the flowers and the setting, commenting on how lovely Daphne would look as a bride. None of them knew what was coming. I guided Daphne toward the bride's preparation room, a small chamber off the main sanctuary, where she could make her final adjustments. The bridesmaids were already there laughing, fixing her veil, making sure every curl was perfect. "I'll see you out there, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. She squeezed my hand, eyes shining. "I love you, Dad. I love you too." I left her surrounded by excitement and certainty and walked back into the sanctuary. The space felt larger now, emptier despite the growing crowd. I made my way down the aisle toward the front pew reserved for the father of the bride. My footsteps echoed against the stone floor, each step drawing me closer to the altar. The same altar where Caroline and I had stood 35 years ago, promising forever. The same altar where her casket had rested 5 years ago, surrounded by flowers just like these. While Daphne and I sat in this same pew, trying to understand how the world could keep moving when ours had stopped. Trevor, a familiar voice, called. I turned to see Douglas Whitmore approaching, hand extended. My lawyer, my friend for 3 decades. He wore an expensive suit and a confident smile. "Congratulations," he said, shaking my hand. "Big day. Lance seems like a good man. You must be proud. If only you knew." I nodded. "Thank you, Douglas. Caroline would have loved this," he added gently. "She'd be so happy seeing Daphne like this." The words were meant kindly. They still hurt. "Yes," I said, "she would." Douglas patted my shoulder and moved on, leaving me alone near the front pew. I sat slowly, gripping the smooth wood. From here I could see everything: the altar, the rows filling with guests, the musicians near the organ, the photographer adjusting his lens, and near the side entrance, I saw Martin, nearly invisible in his dark suit, scanning the room with practiced calm. Our eyes met. He gave a slight nod. My phone vibrated silently. I pulled it out. Martin, package delivered. Back entrance. Mia briefed, secret game, stay quiet. Everything in position. I typed back, understood. The secret game had been Marley's idea. She'd knelt down and told Mia they were playing a special church game where she had to stay as quiet as a mouse to win a prize afterward. Mia thought it sounded wonderful. She didn't know she was about to watch her father's life collapse. I looked toward the altar again, imagining Lance standing there smiling, playing the devoted groom, while his real wife and child waited in a back room. Caroline. I closed my eyes. If you can hear me, help me do this right. Help me be strong enough. I imagined her sitting beside me like she used to during Sunday services, her thumb tracing circles in my palm, a silent reminder that we were never alone. Sometimes love means breaking their heart to save their life. She'd said that when she made me promise to protect Daphne no matter what. I never imagined it would mean this. The organ began to play softly. Conversations faded. Guests turned toward the front. The photographer moved into position. Reverend Jonathan Reed stepped out and took his place at the altar, Bible in hand, serene and ready. This was it. Soon the processional would begin. Bridesmaids would walk the aisle. Then Daphne, radiant, holding my arm, believing she was walking toward her forever. And I would stand beside her, listening, as Lance Lawson spoke vows he never intended to keep, until I stopped him. I looked around once more at the stained glass, the guests holding programs, the altar where joy and grief had already shaped my life. St. Benedict stood silent, holding centuries of secrets. Today it would hold mine. The organ swelled. The ceremony was about to begin. And so was the truth. The music swelled. Everyone stood. Lance Lawson stepped into view from the side entrance, looking like every father's dream son-in-law. The black tuxedo fit him perfectly tailored, elegant, expensive. His dark hair was styled just right, not a strand out of place. And that smile, that practiced, confident smile that had charmed Daphne, charmed me, charmed everyone who'd ever met him. He looked like a man in love, a man about to marry the woman of his dreams. He looked like a lie. Jason Hartley followed a step behind Lance's best man, a college friend he'd introduced us to 6 months ago. Jason wore a matching tuxedo and a supportive grin, playing his part in this performance perfectly. Lance took his place at the altar, standing beside Reverend Jonathan Reed. He adjusted his tie, clasped his hands in front of him, and turned to face the center aisle. Waiting, anticipating. The picture of a nervous groom on the happiest day of his life. I wanted to stand up right then, to shout the truth across the cathedral, to end this before it went any further. But I stayed in my seat, waiting, watching. The bridesmaids entered next, 3 of Daphne's college friends, dressed in soft pastel gowns that complemented the white roses lining the aisle. They carried small bouquets and walked in measured steps, smiling at the guests taking their positions at the front of the sanctuary. Then the music changed. The familiar notes of the bridal march filled the cathedral, that timeless melody that signals the moment everyone has been waiting for. The moment the bride appears, a collective murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Guests shifted in their seats, craning their necks to see. Cameras and phones lifted, ready to capture the moment. The massive wooden doors at the back of the cathedral swung open, and there she was. Daphne stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun streaming through the entrance. Her wedding dress was everything she'd dreamed of, white lace and silk, elegant and timeless, with a train that would sweep down the aisle behind her like something from a fairy tale. Her veil cascaded down her back, held in place by Carolyn's vintage hairpin, the same one her mother had worn, the same one her grandmother had worn before that. She held a bouquet of white roses and lilies, her hands trembling slightly, and she was smiling, radiant, glowing with a happiness so pure and genuine it made my chest ache. She looked so much like Caroline on our wedding day. So beautiful, so full of hope and certainty and love. I stood and moved toward her, offering my arm. Our eyes met, and for just a second, I saw the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to climb into my lap when she had bad dreams, who used to believe her daddy could fix anything. "Ready, Dad?" she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak, couldn't trust my voice. So I just nodded and forced a smile. "Always," I finally managed to say. She tucked her hand into the crook of my elbow, and together we began the long walk down the center aisle. Every step felt like moving through water. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching out, giving me too much time to think, to notice, to remember. I saw familiar faces as we passed, business partners I'd known for decades, friends who'd watched Daphne grow up, distant relatives who'd come from out of state for the wedding. They were all smiling, some wiping away tears, all of them believing they were witnessing something beautiful. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. Everyone wanted to capture this moment, the father walking his only daughter down the aisle to meet her future husband. None of them knew what I knew. None of them had seen what I'd seen. My eyes found Lance at the altar. He was watching Daphne walk toward him, his expression a perfect mask of love and adoration. His eyes were soft. His smile was gentle. He looked like a man who couldn't believe his luck, who couldn't wait to start his life with the woman he loved. Or maybe it was just a performance, the final act before the curtain fell. "This is the last time I'll give her to you," I thought, looking at him. The last time. We reached the altar. Reverend Reed stood waiting, his Bible open, his expression warm and welcoming. Lance stepped forward, his hand extending toward Daphne. The Reverend's voice carried across the cathedral, clear and ceremonial. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" This was the moment. The traditional question. the symbolic gesture of a father entrusting his daughter to her new husband. I looked at Lance, at his outstretched hand, at the confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then I looked at Daphne, at her radiant face, at the trust and love shining in her eyes as she looked at the man she thought would be her husband. "I do," I said, my voice carrying across the silent cathedral. "And I'm about to take her back." I placed Daphne's hand in Lance's. His fingers closed around hers gently, carefully, like he was holding something precious. Like he was holding something he planned to use and discard. Daphne squeezed my hand one last time before letting go. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." I stepped back and moved to my seat in the front pew, sitting down slowly. From here I had a perfect view of the altar, of Daphne and Lance standing side by side, their hands joined, of Reverend Reed opening his Bible and beginning the ceremony. "Achat, dearly beloved." The Reverend began, his voice solemn and practiced. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over the congregation. People settled into their seats, preparing to witness the vows, the exchange of rings, the pronouncement that would make Daphne and Lance husband and wife. I watched Lance's profile, the way he looked at Daphne, the way he held her hand, the way he smiled when she smiled. And all I could think was, in a few minutes, I'm going to destroy this. In a few minutes, everyone in this cathedral is going to know the truth, and nothing will ever be the same again. Reverend Reed spoke of love, trust, and honesty. Every word felt like a knife. Chatit, marriage. He began, his voice carrying across the cathedral with practiced authority, is a sacred covenant built upon trust between two people who have chosen to walk through life together. Trust. I looked at Lance standing at the altar, his hand clasping Daphne's, his face a picture of solemn devotion. "He's lying to everyone here. Shatitai, it is a bond." The Reverend continued, "Founded on honesty between two souls who have promised to share their lives, their dreams, and their truth with one another." Honesty, truth. The words hung in the air, heavy with irony. I watched Lance nod slightly, as if he agreed with every syllable, as if he had any intention of living up to those words. He stood straight, his posture perfect, his expression serious and reverent. The kind of expression a good man wears when he's standing before God and making promises he intends to keep. His hand held Daphne's gently, protectively, like she was something precious he would guard with his life. It was a performance, and he was giving the show of a lifetime. I turned my gaze to Daphne. Her eyes were bright, shining with unshed tears of joy. She looked at Lance like he was her whole world, like she couldn't imagine a future without him. Like every word the Reverend spoke was being written on her heart in permanent ink. She trusted him, completely, absolutely. And he was about to betray her in the worst way possible. Marriage should not be entered into lightly. Reverend Reed said, his tone growing more serious, or unadvisedly, or without careful thought and consideration, and it should never be entered into with deceit. Deceit. My hands gripped the edge of the pew in front of me, my knuckles turning white. That's exactly what's happening. Every word the Reverend spoke was the polar opposite of what Lance Lawson represented. Trust, honesty, commitment, devotion, sacred promises made before God. All lies. I'd stood at this same altar 35 years ago, in this same sanctuary, under this same vaulted ceiling. I'd been younger then, nervous, hopeful, terrified, and excited all at once, and Caroline had stood beside me in her white lace dress, holding my hand just like Daphne was holding Lance's now. The Reverend back then, a different man, but the same words had asked us to make promises to each other. Promises we'd meant with every fiber of our being. "Do you, Trevor, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you promise to love her, honor her, protect her in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do, I promise." And I'd kept that promise. through 30 years of marriage, through joy and hardship, through building a business and raising a daughter, through sleepless nights when Daphne was sick as a baby, through Caroline's diagnosis, through watching cancer slowly steal the woman I loved away from me one day at a time. I'd kept my promise until her last breath, until she'd squeezed my hand one final time in that hospital room and whispered, "Take care of our girl." Those vows had been real, sacred, built on love and truth, and a commitment that had lasted through everything life had thrown at us. But the vows Lance was about to make, they were poison dressed up as promises. Baranj. Reverend Reed said, his hands resting on the open Bible before him, requires commitment. It requires sacrifice. And above all, it requires truth. Truth. The word echoed through the cathedral, bouncing off stone walls that had heard that same word spoken at countless weddings over more than a century. My grip on the pew tightened. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled, ready to move. Not yet. Wait. The Reverend paused, his eyes sweeping across the congregation. 200 people sat in those pews, all of them quiet, respectful, waiting for the ceremony to continue, waiting for the moment when Lance and Daphne would exchange rings and become husband and wife. None of them knew, none of them suspected. Before these two young people exchanged their vows, Reverend Reed said, his voice taking on the formal ceremonial tone required by tradition, that I am duty-bound by the laws of this state and the customs of this church to ask. My heart stopped. This was it. The moment every wedding ceremony included. The moment that was supposed to be a formality, a traditional question that no one ever answered. Except today someone would. If any person here present, the Reverend continued, his gaze moving slowly across the congregation, who knows of any legal impediment or lawful reason why these two should not be joined together in holy matrimony. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, oppressive. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes focused on the altar. 200 people holding their breath, waiting for the question to pass unanswered as it always did. I felt the weight of Caroline's promise pressing down on me. Protect our girl, even when she doesn't understand. Especially when she doesn't understand. But let them speak now. My hands gripped the pew so tightly I thought the wood might crack. My legs tensed, preparing to stand, preparing to do what I'd come here to do. This was the moment. The final opportunity to stop this wedding before it became legal and binding. The last chance to save Daphne from a man who planned to use her, betray her, and destroy everything we'd built as a family. The last chance to protect my daughter, even if it meant she'd hate me for it. Reverend Reed's final words hung in the air like a challenge. Or forever hold your peace. I stood. The wooden pew creaked beneath me, the sound echoing through the cathedral like a gunshot in the silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Every eye in the sanctuary turned toward me. 200 faces, 200 expressions, shifting from peaceful anticipation to confusion to shock. I opened my mouth and spoke the words that would change everything. I object. The cathedral erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd, like a wave crashing against shore. Voices rose in a sudden cacophony of shock and disbelief. What? Did he just... Oh my God! At the altar, Daphne spun around her face, pale, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Dad. Her voice cracked on the word, a mixture of confusion and horror that cut straight through my chest. Lance's expression flickered just for a split second. I saw it. Pure, unfiltered shock. His mask slipped, revealing the panic beneath. Then, just as quickly, he pulled it back into place, schooling his features into bewilderment and concern. Mr. Donnelly, he started, but I didn't let him finish. Reverend Reed stood frozen at the altar, his Bible still open in his hands, his face a picture of stunned disbelief. In all his years of conducting weddings, he'd probably never had anyone actually answer that question. Mr. Donnelly, he said, his voice shaking slightly. This is highly irregular. Are you certain you wish to? I stepped out of the pew and into the center aisle. My legs felt steadier than they had any right to. My voice when I spoke was calm, clear, unwavering. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said, looking directly at Daphne. But this wedding cannot proceed. Dad, what are you doing? Daphne's voice rose, tears already streaming down her face, smudging the makeup she'd spent hours perfecting. What are you doing? Behind me, I heard Douglas Whitmore stand. Trevor, what's going on? Other voices joined his. Is he all right? Maybe it's stress. This is insane. Should someone call? I ignored them all. My eyes were locked on Lance Lawson, watching as he carefully maintained his mask of confused concern. Mr. Donnelly, Lance said, his voice taking on that smooth, reasonable tone he'd perfected over months of charming our family. I'm sure there's been some terrible misunderstanding. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's no misunderstanding, I said, my voice carrying across the cathedral. The only misunderstanding here is about who you really are, Lance Lawson. A fresh wave of gasps and whispers swept through the crowd. I heard someone near the back say something about calling security. Someone else suggested I was having a breakdown. Let them think what they wanted. Lance's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Sir, I don't know what you think you know, but I know exactly who you are. I cut him off, my voice hardening. And I know exactly what you've done. Daphne stepped forward, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking. Dad, please. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing everyone. I don't know what's gotten into you, but... Daphne. I turned to face her fully, and the look on her face nearly broke me. Confusion, betrayal, hurt. She was looking at me like I was a stranger, like I'd lost my mind, like I was the villain in this story. Sweetheart, I know this is hard. I know you don't understand. And I'm sorrier than you can possibly imagine. My voice caught, but I forced myself to continue. But you will understand. Soon. I promise you will. Understand what? She cried, her voice breaking on a sob. You're ruining my wedding. You're standing up here in front of everyone we know, and you're... She couldn't finish. She turned away, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Lance moved to her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, playing the role of supportive fiancé, comforting the bride whose unstable father was causing a scene. It's all right, he murmured to her loud enough for everyone to hear. We'll figure this out. Your father is clearly under a lot of stress. Now don't you dare, I said, my voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. Don't you dare pretend to comfort her when you're the reason she's crying. Lance's mask slipped again, just for a heartbeat. His eyes met mine, and in that brief moment I saw the calculation there. The assessment. He was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much damage I could do, whether he could still salvage this. He couldn't. The whispers behind me had grown louder. I heard snippets of conversation. I'd never seen him like this. Poor Daphne. Should someone stop him? Douglas was making his way toward me, concern etched on his face. Trevor, I think we need to talk. Outside. Right now. But I wasn't leaving. Not until everyone in this cathedral knew the truth. I turned to face the congregation. 200 faces stared back at me, some confused, some concerned, some already judging me as the father who'd lost his mind and ruined his daughter's special day. They didn't know yet, but they would. I took a breath and let my voice carry across the stone walls of St. Benedict's Cathedral, across the same sanctuary, where I'd married Caroline, where we'd baptized Daphne, where we'd said goodbye to my wife 5 years ago. Lance Lawson, I said clearly, is not the man he claims to be. The cathedral fell silent. Even the whispers stopped. Every eye was on me now, waiting, wondering, some probably still thinking I'd lost my mind. And I was about to tell them something none of them could believe, before I reveal the truth that brought the entire church to silence. Comment the word truth below so I know you're still here with me. I want to see who's brave enough to stay until the very end of this story. And just a quick note, the next part includes some dramatized elements created for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, you're free to stop watching here. But if you're ready to see everything unravel, stay with me. Before anyone could react, I spoke the words I'd been holding back since this morning. Lance Lawson is already married. He has a wife and a daughter. The cathedral exploded. What? Oh my God! That can't be. Gasps and shocked whispers erupted from every corner of the sanctuary. 200 people reacting in unison, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of disbelief. Lance stepped forward, his face a mask of outrage and wounded dignity. That is absolutely insane, Mr. Donnelly. I think you're very confused. I'm not confused, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I saw them this morning. Your wife Marley and your 4-year-old daughter. Daphne's voice broke through the chaos, small and shaking. Dad, no. You're wrong. Lance would never tell him Lance. Tell Dad he's wrong. Lance turned to her, reaching for her hands, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. Sweetheart, your father is clearly under an enormous amount of stress. Maybe we should get him some help. I don't need help, I said coldly. I need the truth to come to light. I turned toward the side entrance where Martin stood waiting. Our eyes met across the sanctuary. Bring them in. The side door opened. Every head in the cathedral turned as a woman stepped through the doorway. She was thin, dressed in simple jeans and a cardigan, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She held a folder in one hand, and she held the hand of a little girl with the other. The child was small, 4 years old maybe, with blonde curls that bounced as she walked. She wore a pink dress and clutched a stuffed rabbit under one arm. Her eyes were wide as she took in the massive sanctuary, the rows of people, the flowers and candles, and overwhelming strangeness of it all. The woman Marley walked slowly down the side aisle, her daughter's hand gripped tightly in hers. Every step seemed to take enormous effort, like she was walking through water or toward her own execution. The cathedral had fallen completely silent. 200 people watched them approach, confusion written on every face. The little girl looked around nervously, intimidated by the crowd, by the tall stone walls, by the way everyone was staring at her and her mother. Then she saw him, Lance, standing at the altar in his perfect black tuxedo, looking like a prince from a fairy tale. Her face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. Daddy! The word rang out across the cathedral, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing off stone walls, hitting every ear in the sanctuary with the force of a physical blow. The collective gasp that followed was like a wave crashing. The little girl let go of her mother's hand and ran her small feet pattering across the stone floor, her curls bouncing, her stuffed rabbit trailing behind her. Daddy, Daddy! She was running straight toward the altar, toward Lance. I watched it happen as if in slow motion. Watched Lance's face drain of all color. Watched his careful mask shatter completely. Watched him stand frozen, paralyzed, unable to move or speak, or do anything but stare at the little girl racing toward him with pure joy on her face. Daphne turned, following the sound of the child's voice. Her face was a picture of utter confusion. What is... The little girl reached the altar steps and threw herself at Lance, wrapping her small arms around his legs, beaming up at him with absolute adoration. You look so handsome, Daddy, she said, her voice high and sweet and completely guileless. Are you getting married? Mommy said you were getting married. Lance looked down at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. No sound came out. Marley had stopped halfway down the aisle, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she whispered, though her voice somehow carried in the deadly silence. I'm so sorry. She forced herself to keep walking, to close the distance to the altar. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, steadier, though it shook with emotion. My name is Marley Lawson, she said, looking directly at Daphne. I'm his wife. We've been legally married for 5 years. She held up the folder, opening it to reveal the document inside. Even from where I stood, I could see the official seal, the signatures, the date. A marriage certificate, with Lance's name and Marley's name, dated 5 years ago. No. Daphne's voice was barely a whisper. She took a step backward, away from Lance, away from the little girl clinging to his legs. No, this can't be. She looked at Lance, her eyes desperate, pleading for him to say something. Anything. To tell everyone this was a mistake, a lie, a cruel prank. Lance, she said, her voice breaking. Tell them this isn't true. Tell them. Lance opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. His face had gone from white to gray. His hands hung at his sides, limp and useless. He looked like a man who'd been caught in a trap with no way out, watching the walls close in around him. The little girl Mia looked up at him, confused by his silence. Daddy, are you okay? Jason Hartley, standing beside Lance as his best man, stepped back as if he'd been burned. Dude, he said, his voice sharp with shock and anger. What the hell is this? Daphne looked from Mia to Marley, to the marriage certificate, to Lance. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, her hands shaking so badly, her bouquet dropped to the floor, white roses and lilies scattering across the altar steps. Lance, she whispered one more time. Please, tell me this isn't real. But Lance said nothing, because there was nothing he could say. The evidence was standing right in front of her. A 4-year-old little girl with his blonde curls and his smile calling him daddy. A woman holding a legal marriage certificate with his name on it. The truth had finally irrevocably come to light. Daphne looked at me, then her eyes finding mine across the chaos of the altar. In that moment, I saw her entire world collapsing. Every dream, every hope, every promise she'd believed in, falling apart in front of 200 witnesses. The little girl's voice, Daddy, still echoed through the cathedral, and everyone was watching as the man at the altar said nothing at all. But I wasn't done. The worst part was still ahead. There's one more thing, I said, my voice cutting through the shocked silence. One more thing everyone needs to know. Marley had moved closer to the altar, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Daphne with an expression of pure misery. He forced me into this, she said, her voice shaking. We owe money to dangerous people. He said it was the only way to save our daughter. I didn't want to. I tried to warn you. Daphne's face was a mask of shock and betrayal. She looked at Marley, at the marriage certificate still visible in the folder, at little Mia still clinging to Lance's legs. So this was all about money. Her voice was hollow. You were planning to steal from my family. Marley nodded, shame washing over her features. I'm so sorry. Lance seemed to realize he needed to regain control of the situation. His face shifted, taking on an expression of desperate sincerity. Okay, yes, I should have been honest from the beginning. He looked at Daphne, his voice softening. But I love you, Daphne. The money that was just to solve a problem, and then we could have had a real life together. Just you and me. No, that's a lie, I said coldly. And it's not even the worst lie. Lance's eyes snapped to me, a flash of warning in them. Mr. Donnelly, I think you've said enough. I haven't said enough, not even close. I pulled out my phone, holding it up, so the guests in the front rows could see the screen. I swiped to the screenshots Martin had shown me this morning, the evidence I'd photographed and sent to the police. This morning, I said, my voice carrying across the stunned cathedral. I discovered something that even Marley didn't know about. I passed the phone to Douglas Whitmore, who was standing in the front pew, his face pale with shock. He looked at the screen, his eyes widening. He passed it to the person next to him. Then another. The images began circulating through the front rows, gasps and murmurs following in their wake. "Those are emails," I said. "Encrypted messages, bank transfers, all from Lance's laptop." I quoted the key phrases from memory, letting each word hit like a hammer blow. Target 3 months post-wedding. Make it look like an accident. $50,000 on completion. The silence that followed was absolute. Deadly. "Lance wasn't just planning to take our money," I said, looking directly at him. "He was planning to make sure I couldn't stop him. Permanently." The word hung in the air like poison. He'd already paid someone a deposit, $10,000. The timeline was set, 3 months after the wedding. I turned back to the congregation, many of whom were now staring at their neighbors' phones, looking at the screenshots being passed around. "That phone call you got this morning, Lance in the car, I heard it. Your contact was confirming the plan. Everything is on track. 3 months, not 1 day sooner." Those were your words. Douglas stood, his face ashen. "Trevor, are you saying he was planning to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the word. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Daphne's hand flew to her mouth. She stumbled backward, nearly falling. One of the bridesmaids caught her arm, steadying her. "Oh my God," Daphne whispered. "Oh my God. Dad, he was going to—" She looked at me, and I saw the moment it all clicked into place. The rushed engagement, the quick wedding, the way Lance had asked so many questions about my schedule, my routines, my habits. He'd been planning it from the start. "You have no proof." Lance's voice cracked desperation, bleeding through his careful composure. "Those could be fake, photoshopped. You're trying to frame me because you never wanted—" "They're not fake," I said calmly. "The police have verified them. They're waiting outside right now." As if on cue, I saw movement near the cathedral entrance. 2 uniformed officers had entered quietly, positioning themselves by the doors. Behind them, I could see more officers outside. Lance saw them too. His eyes darted from the police to the evidence being passed around the congregation, to Marley standing there with tears on her face, to Mia still holding onto his legs, confused and scared by all the shouting, and then to Daphne, standing there in her white wedding dress, looking at him like he was a monster, like he was someone she'd never known at all. I watched the realization hit him. He was trapped, exposed. Every lie he'd told, every plan he'd made, every careful manipulation, all of it was out in the open now. There was no talking his way out of this. No charming smile or smooth explanation that would make any of this go away. He looked at the police officers by the door, at the evidence in people's hands, at me standing in the center aisle, the man who'd destroyed everything he'd worked for. His face went from desperate to panicked, to something cold and calculating. And then he ran. He shoved past Mia, who stumbled and fell with a small cry. He pushed past Reverend Reed, who reached out to stop him but missed. He vaulted over the altar railing with surprising agility and bolted for the side entrance, the one Martin wasn't guarding. "Stop him," someone shouted. The police moved, but Lance had a head start. He crashed through the side door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The cathedral erupted in chaos. People stood, shouted, pointed. Someone, maybe Jason, tried to go after him, but was held back by an officer. Marley had dropped to her knees, gathering Mia into her arms, both of them crying. And Daphne stood frozen at the altar, staring at the spot where Lance had been standing just seconds ago, where the man she'd been about to marry had been standing, before he'd run like the criminal he was. He didn't reach the exit. Law enforcement had anticipated his move. Lance had managed perhaps 4 strides before 2 officers in uniform materialized from the side passage, creating an impenetrable barrier. Their demeanor remained composed, methodical, inescapable. Lance Lawson, his body went rigid, fear spreading across his features like spilled ink. "There's been some kind of mistake," You're being placed under arrest. The second officer moved behind him with practiced efficiency, metal restraints at the ready. Lance attempted to step backward, but space had run out. The altar loomed at his back. The officers stood ahead. 200 pairs of eyes surrounded him from all directions. The charges against you include bigamy under state law, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. The first officer stated, his delivery measured and clear as he continued with the formal advisement of rights. This is complete madness. If you just let me explain, you'll have that opportunity at the precinct. The sound of the handcuffs locking into place resonated through the cathedral with startling clarity, cutting through the shocked stillness that had descended over the gathered crowd. The lead officer addressed those assembled. Anthony Greco has been taken into custody outside these premises. He was making an attempt to enter the building. Marley, who'd been kneeling on the floor beside Mia, jerked her head up at the name. Greco. He's been detained, ma'am. You're no longer in any danger. The relief that washed over Marley came with such force it seemed almost violent. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the nearest pew, gathering Mia against her chest. Tears flowing freely, but these weren't tears born of sorrow. These were tears of liberation. The officers began escorting Lance toward the cathedral entrance. His gait had become awkward, the restraints pulling his shoulders into an unnatural position, transforming his elegant tuxedo into something that resembled theatrical costume rather than wedding attire. When they reached the center aisle, he pivoted his gaze, finding Daphne where she remained standing near the altar. Daphne, please, you have to listen. Stop. Her voice emerged devoid of inflection, absolute in its finality. Moisture streamed down her cheeks, yet her face might as well have been carved from marble. Don't speak my name again. His composure wavered, and then he permitted the officers to guide him forward. The massive cathedral doors swung open, revealing the strobing lights of emergency vehicles beyond, before closing again with a resonant thud that seemed to mark the conclusion of something irreversible. Quiet engulfed the sacred space, then Daphne's legs buckled. My response was immediate. Martin materialized beside me simultaneously. Between us, we prevented her fall and guided her descent to sit upon the altar steps. She offered no resistance. She simply gazed forward, unseeing her elaborate wedding gown spreading around her like the petals of a crushed flower. Marley rose from her seat with visible effort and moved toward us, her approach tentative. Miss Donnelly, there's information I need to share with you. Daphne raised her eyes, the lids swollen and reddened. Haven't you revealed enough already? I made attempts to warn you. The statement hung suspended between them. Nice. 3 weeks prior to today, I composed an anonymous letter and sent it to your workplace. In that letter, I informed you that Lance Lawson was concealing his identity. Daphne's eyes widened slightly. A letter did arrive. I dismissed it as someone's cruel joke. 14 days ago, I placed a phone call to you. I managed to reach your personal assistant, but Lance returned to our residence earlier than anticipated. He overheard my conversation. He seized the phone from my hand. Daphne's breathing became shallow. That phone call. I heard a voice speaking my name, and then the line went dead. He issued a threat regarding Mia. Marley continued, her voice fracturing. He told me that if I made another attempt to contact you, he would take our daughter and vanish, and I would spend the remainder of my existence wondering whether she was still alive. Comprehension dawned across Daphne's features. You were attempting to protect me, Marley responded with a nod. I was paralyzed with fear, but I couldn't maintain my silence. I'm sorry it wasn't enough. Those warnings, Daphne murmured, directing her attention toward me. They were legitimate. There was no way for you to have known, I replied gently. She surveyed her surroundings, the floral arrangements that lined the pews, the guests who'd fallen into stunned silence. the photographer who stood motionless with his camera hanging forgotten at his side. Her gaze found Mia, who was now sitting quietly in a corner occupied with her stuffed rabbit. Her wedding ceremony, destroyed, yet she remained breathing. She was protected. She redirected her focus to me. You rescued me, even knowing I might despise you for it. I would accept your hatred. I responded, provided you remained safe. I believed I was in love with him. She whispered, and then her composure shattered completely. I gathered her into my arms as she wept exactly as I had during her childhood. The cathedral began to empty around us. Douglas Whitmore passed by offering a solemn acknowledgement. Marley collected Mia and departed alongside an officer hesitating momentarily to cast a final glance toward Daphne, an expression that contained both remorse and tentative hope. Martin maintained his position nearby, ever vigilant. Eventually, only the two of us remained. What comes next? Daphne asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. We return home, I told her, and we allow time to do its work. She acknowledged this with a small movement of her head and pressed closer against me. The machinery of justice had completed its function, and my daughter had finally grasped the reasoning behind my actions. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the stained glass windows, casting fragments of colored light across the stone floor. The flowers remained in their arrangements, their fragrance still perfuming the air. The candles burned steadily in their brass holders. Everything about the physical space remained unchanged, but everything else had been fundamentally transformed. I held Daphne as she processed the magnitude of what had occurred, feeling the tremors that ran through her frame as reality settled over her in waves. This morning she'd awakened, believing she would become a bride. She'd imagined walking down this aisle toward her future, toward happiness, toward the life she'd spent months planning and dreaming about. Instead, she'd discovered that the man she'd trusted had viewed her as nothing more than an asset to be exploited, that he'd constructed an elaborate deception spanning more than a year, that he'd been willing to destroy lives, including potentially mine, in pursuit of financial gain. The weight of that betrayal would take considerable time to process fully. Can we leave now? Daphne asked quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. Whenever you're ready, I assured her. She pulled back slightly, wiping at her face with trembling fingers. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks. Her carefully styled hair had come partially loose from its pins. The veil that had been secured with Caroline's vintage hairpin hung askew. She looked nothing like the radiant bride who'd walked down this aisle less than an hour ago. She looked like someone who'd survived something catastrophic, which I supposed was accurate. Martin approached quietly. The car is ready whenever you are, Miss Daphne. She nodded without speaking. Together, Martin and I helped her to her feet. The long train of her wedding dress trailed behind us as we made our way toward the side exit, the same entrance through which Marley and Mia had appeared earlier. It seemed appropriate somehow to avoid the main doors where wedding guests would typically emerge in celebration. There was nothing to celebrate here. As we stepped outside into the afternoon light, I kept my arm around Daphne's shoulders, supporting her weight, as we walked toward the waiting sedan. The parking area had largely emptied, though a few remaining guests stood in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones and casting glances in our direction. I ignored them all. My focus remained entirely on my daughter, on getting her home, on beginning whatever healing process lay ahead. Martin opened the rear door and Daphne climbed inside, gathering the voluminous fabric of her dress as best she could. I slid in beside her, and Martin closed the door with a gentle click before taking his position behind the wheel. As the engine purred to life and we pulled away from St. Benedict's Cathedral, Daphne leaned her head against my shoulder once more. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. Those two words carried more weight than any others she could have spoken. Justice had indeed been served, and the long process of recovery could finally begin. Half a year had passed when I found myself seated in my study one afternoon, sunlight streaming through the glass and warming the wooden desk before me. Among the papers and files sat a recent photograph of Daphne captured just days earlier. Her expression held genuine happiness, The smile wasn't identical to the unguarded joy she'd possessed before that morning in November, but it was authentic. It illuminated her entire face, reaching all the way to her eyes. I reclined in my chair and allowed my thoughts to drift across everything that had transpired since that day inside St. Benedict's Cathedral. The legal proceedings against Lance Lawson had concluded with a 25-year prison sentence, 5 years assigned for the bigamy conviction, 10 for the fraud charges, and 15 for conspiracy to cause serious bodily harm. Though the sentences would be served concurrently, rather than consecutively, even assuming exemplary conduct behind bars, he would remain incarcerated for the better part of 2 decades. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled entirely under the weight of evidence presented in court. Anthony Greco's arrest outside the cathedral that same morning had proven equally consequential. The indictment against him had been substantial racketeering, extortion, illegal loan operations, and conspiracy to commit homicide. The prosecution had secured a 30-year sentence. Law enforcement officials revealed they'd been assembling their case against Greco for nearly a year, and the documentation we'd provided had supplied the final pieces they'd needed to ensure conviction. Marley Lawson's situation had been handled with more nuance by the judicial system. In exchange for her complete cooperation and testimony, she'd been granted immunity from most potential charges. The court had imposed probation along with a suspended sentence, with the presiding judge formally recognizing that she'd been operating under coercion, specifically threats directed at her young daughter's safety. The judge had noted for the record that Marley had attempted to alert Daphne to the danger. She'd done everything within her limited power. I'd made the decision to settle Mia's outstanding medical obligations in full, $95,000 accumulated from her premature birth and subsequent treatments. Beyond that, I'd assisted Marley in relocating to a community outside the metropolitan area, establishing a trust fund designated for Mia's future educational expenses and ongoing healthcare needs. Caroline would have responded identically in my position. That child bore no responsibility for her father's crimes. When I'd informed Marley of these arrangements, she'd broken down completely, tears flowing freely. She'd anticipated condemnation, not compassion. The initial 30 days following the aborted wedding ceremony had tested us severely. Daphne had withdrawn into near total silence where I was concerned. Her anger burned in multiple directions toward Lance for his deception, toward the universe for its cruelty, and toward me for orchestrating the public destruction of what should have been the happiest day of her life. She couldn't comprehend why I hadn't approached her privately with my concerns. I'd chosen not to defend my actions during that period. I'd simply allowed her space to experience her rage. By the second month, she'd begun working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. The process moved gradually, but she started untangling the complex emotions surrounding the betrayal. During the 3rd month, understanding began to crystallize. She finally grasped the reasoning behind my approach. A private conversation would have likely resulted in disbelief, possibly followed by her cutting me out of her life for questioning her judgment. The public revelation, though devastating, had been undeniable. Now, 6 months removed from that November morning, she'd emerged transformed, stronger than before, more discerning in her assessment of people and situations. The experience hadn't shattered her, it had refined her. A knock sounded against my office door, pulling me from reflection. "Come in," I called. The door opened, and Daphne entered, dressed casually in denim and a comfortable sweater, her hair pulled back simply. She looked vibrant. She looked like the person she was meant to be. "Hey, Dad. Seeing you always brightens my day. How did things go today?" She settled into the chair positioned across from my desk. I had coffee with Marley and Mia. This information caught me off guard. "Did you—" "Yeah, Mia's thriving. She mentions the beautiful church building occasionally. Marley secured employment recently. She's genuinely making an effort to build a stable life." We shared a moment of comfortable silence. "There's something I want to tell you," Daphne said. "I'm listening." Thank you for protecting me. Despite the fact that I despised you initially, your anger was completely justified. I was furious because your assessment proved accurate, she acknowledged quietly. And I didn't want to face how completely I'd been deceived. You weren't foolish. You had opened your heart to someone. Moisture gathered in her eyes. Mom occupies my thoughts frequently. She would be enormously proud of who you're becoming. Daphne's smile carried a bittersweet quality. I'm rebuilding my capacity to trust others. The progress is incremental. There's no timeline you need to follow. I've been considering returning to university, she revealed. Psychology specifically. I want to support people who've experienced similar situations. You would excel in that field. Our conversation continued exploring possibilities for her future path. Then Martin's figure appeared in the doorway. Apologies, I wasn't aware Miss Daphne was visiting. Daphne rose and embraced him warmly. Thank you for everything. After her departure, my attention shifted to the framed photograph of Caroline positioned on the bookshelf. We succeeded, I murmured toward her image. She's going to recover completely. Beyond the windows, the city's illumination began emerging as daylight faded. Perfection remained elusive in our daily existence, but honesty had been restored, and that achievement held sufficient value. The photographs scattered across my desk told a story of gradual healing. Daphne at a charity event last month, her posture confident. Daphne hiking with friends 2 weeks ago, genuine laughter captured mid-moment. Daphne at Sunday dinner just days earlier, animated as she discussed her plans for the future. Each image represented progress measured in small increments. Recovery from betrayal of that magnitude couldn't happen overnight. The wounds had been profound. Not just the discovery of Lance's deception, but the realization that she'd been targeted specifically for her family's wealth, that someone had studied her patterns and vulnerabilities, that violence had been planned against someone she loved. Those weren't injuries that healed quickly or cleanly, but they were healing. I'd watched her navigate through distinct phases over these months. The initial shock had given way to anger, which had eventually transformed into a period of deep sadness. She'd mourned not just the relationship, but the future she'd envisioned, the trust that had been violated, the innocence she couldn't reclaim. The therapy had provided essential support. Dr. Patricia Chen had specialized in helping victims of elaborate fraud and manipulation. She'd helped Daphne understand that intelligence and caution offered no guaranteed protection against skilled predators, that loving someone didn't make you weak or stupid, that recognizing red flags became nearly impossible when someone deliberately camouflaged them. Gradually, Daphne had stopped blaming herself. That shift had marked a crucial turning point. Her interest in psychology made perfect sense in retrospect. She wanted to transform her experience into something constructive to help others avoid similar pain or recover from it more effectively. Caroline had possessed that same instinct, the drive to create meaning from suffering, to ensure that pain served some larger purpose. I stood and moved to the window, watching the city transition from day to evening. Somewhere out there, Marley was likely preparing dinner for Mia, living a life freed from Greco's threats and Lance's schemes. The trust fund would ensure Mia received the medical care she required, that her mother wouldn't face impossible financial choices. Somewhere else, Lance sat in a cell, facing the consequences of his calculated cruelty. I felt no satisfaction in his imprisonment, but I felt no sympathy either. He'd made deliberate choices, had been willing to destroy lives for personal gain. And here in this house that Caroline and I had built together, our daughter was finding her way forward, not backward to who she'd been before that person couldn't be recovered, but forward to someone new, someone stronger, more aware, more compassionate toward others who'd suffered similar betrayals. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times. Through the walls, I heard Martin moving about in the kitchen, likely preparing his evening tea before heading to his own cottage on the property. Faithful Martin, who'd seen the danger before anyone else, who'd had the courage to act decisively. I returned to my desk and began organizing papers for tomorrow's business meetings. Life continued forward. The company required attention. Charitable foundations needed oversight. Daily routines provided structure and purpose. But the most important work had been accomplished. My daughter was safe. She was healing. She understood now why I'd made the choices I had, even though those choices had caused her temporary anguish. Sometimes love required difficult actions. Sometimes protection looked like cruelty in the moment, only revealing its true nature with the passage of time. Caroline had understood that instinctively. She'd made me promise to protect Daphne no matter what, specifically including the circumstances where Daphne might not understand or appreciate that protection. I'd kept that promise. The cost had been high weeks of my daughter's anger, the public spectacle, the emotional toll of watching her world collapse in front of hundreds of witnesses. But the alternative cost would have been infinitely higher. I closed the final folder and switched off the desk lamp. The photograph of Daphne remained visible in the dimming light, her smile a testament to resilience and recovery. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to navigate. But tonight I could rest, knowing that the crisis had passed, that justice had been administered, that healing was well underway. The house settled into its evening quiet around me. And for the first time in 6 months, that quiet felt peaceful rather than heavy. We had survived, and that was everything. Before you close this chapter of my life, let me leave you with something that matters more than the scandal, more than the arrest, more than the spectacle inside that cathedral. A father's instinct is not control. It is responsibility. The unease I felt that morning was not anxiety about a wedding. It was a warning I almost ignored, because I wanted peace more than confrontation. I convinced myself that stepping back was respect. I told myself love meant support, but I learned that love without discernment can become negligence. I believe God places a quiet alert in our spirit when something is wrong. My failure was not sensing it. My failure was waiting too long to act on it. When I stood and objected, I was not strong. I was shaking inside. I knew I was about to fracture my daughter's trust in me. I knew people would whisper that I was dramatic, unstable, jealous of losing control. In that moment, I accepted that I might become the villain in her eyes. Many family story moments are not clean or cinematic. They are messy, humiliating, and deeply personal. Yet sometimes the choice inside a family story is simple, temporary anger or permanent damage. I chose anger. Looking back, I see the red flags I softened in my own mind. The rushed timeline, the subtle questions about finances, the charm that felt slightly rehearsed. I dismissed each one because I feared pushing Daphne away. Don't do what I did. Do not let fear of conflict silence you when your intuition is unsettled. Ask questions early. Investigate respectfully. Have the uncomfortable conversation before it becomes a public catastrophe. Love is not blind agreement. Love is active guardianship. Some people frame what I did as revenge. It wasn't. Revenge is fueled by ego. Protection is fueled by duty. This is not one of those tidy grandpa stories where wisdom arrives after irreversible loss. This is one of the grandpa stories where someone decides to intervene before tragedy writes the ending. Being a father or grandfather is not about being celebrated. It is about being accountable. It is about standing firm when everyone else is clapping. I also had to confront my pride. I built a successful life. I believed I could read people. Yet I almost let a manipulator into my family because I confused charisma with character. In every family story, there is a moment where we must admit we were wrong. I should have run a background check sooner. I should have trusted Martin's concerns earlier. I should have allowed scrutiny before celebration. If I had acted sooner, my daughter would not have endured humiliation in front of hundreds of guests. My hesitation cost her peace. But here is another truth: mercy matters too. After everything collapsed, I chose not to let bitterness define me. Marley and Mia were victims of the same deception. Paying for Mia's medical debt was not charity. It was alignment with the values Caroline and I tried to model. Even in difficult grandpa stories, compassion must remain intact. Protection without compassion becomes hardness. Protection with compassion becomes legacy. If you are listening and you are a parent, grandparent, guardian, or mentor, hear me clearly. Do not wait for certainty when patterns are forming. Patterns matter more than promises. Charm is not evidence. Speed is not sincerity. If something feels wrong, pause the celebration. Silence the music. Ask the deeper questions. You may be misunderstood. You may be criticized, but regret lasts longer than embarrassment. In the quiet months after the wedding, that never was, my daughter slowly understood why I acted publicly. She told me one evening that she finally saw how close she had come to losing everything. Healing did not arrive overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt. Yet that process became part of our growth. That is what these grandpa stories ultimately carry. The reminder that courage is rarely convenient, but it can be redemptive. If this family story resonated with you, share your perspective below. Would you have stood up? Would you have confronted the issue privately? Your insight might guide someone facing their own crossroads. If reflective grandpa stories about responsibility, legacy, and difficult love speak to you, consider subscribing and sharing so this community can continue meaningful conversations. Someone you know may need the encouragement to act sooner than I did. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And a gentle note before you continue: some of the upcoming stories include dramatized elements crafted for educational reflection. If that approach does not align with your preference, feel free to explore other content better suited to you. But if you value layered storytelling that invites deeper thought, I will be here.